talking about our connection to everything and nature. For the most part, when people hear the word magic, most people either think of some guy on stage with a rabbit in a hat, or new age woo woo content that they won't even take a second look at. But when in reality, I believe it especially used to be a science, and it's a science that we don't understand now. We don't understand yet, and it's a way of manipulating or interacting with energy surrounding us at all times. Would you agree with that? And what would you consider magic to be?
Yeah, I think magic is really the science of utilizing trained visualization and sentient skills. So, like visualizing something to the point where if you're thinking of a rose, you can smell the rose. You can hold the image in your mind. You can twirl it all the way around. Notice all of the different features of it. Zoom in, zoom out. Develop a mental buoyancy and dexterity with the things that you're working with and be able to sensationalize them as if they were real, but clearly using the powers of the mind and of visualization. And the reason why that is important is because that sets the precedent for what is to come next. See, most people who don't have any context or complete, physical inhabitants, for lack of better terms, muggles might be another colloquial use, is that they would tend to think of things as being so concrete that there's no possible way that their visualization could impact anything. But the truth of the matter is that even for the human organism to learn a new task, they first have to be able to see it or imagine themselves doing it in order to do it. That's the way our neurology works. And so by utilizing magical visualization and sensationalization skills, whether that's with ritual or not with ritual, um, you're able to create the original template for something to happen so that it's easier for that thing to happen, and or it can change the perspective of the operator to see through a filter as if it had already happened. And because observation is creation on a very practical quantum level, what you are observing yourself do is what you're actually creating and putting out there. So for people who just simply scoff at the concept of magic today as anything that is real, I would say that you're thinking about magic in the way that Hollywood has, and possibly, other different types of entertainment industries have kind of shoved it down your throat for the last 30, 40, 50 years, and not thinking of what it actually could be outside of that context. Are you going to use a wand and like duel with people with laser beams coming out of your wand? Most likely not. But are you able to utilize the inherent powers of visualization and enhance those powers with, herbs or resonant materials that come from nature to assist in manifesting that task? And the answer is like, oh yeah. In fact, if you just really put your preconceived notions aside and try it, you'll find out that it works. So there's many different forms of magic that are available today. I practice a wide variety of them, everything from folk magic to ceremonial magic to, my own spiritual path is largely within druidic bardic magic and poetry and speech that are able to enchant and change the influence and minds of people, which really is not that much different than neurolinguistic programming and other more scientific things. So it really just depends on the perspective of who is listening to it. But magic definitely exists, and for those who incorporate it into their lives in practical ways and don't get caught up in fancy rituals and just like, because for a lot of people, magic in a pagan path is more or less just like going to church and performing a ritual with other people, and they're not really serious about attaining a result, or they're doing something that's really somewhat frivolous in terms of altering their reality. But when people use it as a force to be able to alter their own reality and see what comes out of it and journal about it and make changes to it and constantly repeat it and approach it scientifically, it's a very, very valid form of being able to not just manifest what you want, but work with natural cycles and inherent cycles of nature to be able to benefit your life and ecology and other things.
Now you mentioned folk magic and ceremonial. Could you kind of give us like the differences, the basic differences between what folk magic is and ceremonial magic?
Yeah, absolutely. So every different civilization has always had forms of folk magic. I mean, here in the United States, there's the Dutch folk magic and Germanic folk magic traditions that were really common in New England, especially in Pennsylvania kind of area. You have the Appalachian folk magic practices that were really common by the Scots and the Scotch Irish and just Irish immigrants that settled in the Appalachian Mountains. You have, of course, the folk magic traditions of multitudinous different Native American tribes. You have, so many different types of folk magic that came from different places where people migrated from. So when you say folk magic, you almost really have to talk about a particular region or type of folk magic in order to understand all of the practices that could be in there. But usually those things rely on very basic everyday things that you're going to find and be able to use in order to influence reality, for lack of a better term. So for instance, one thing of Scandinavian folk magic is that they have a tradition of multitudinous different creatures that kind of exist in our same dimension but can't be seen by our eyes. They talk about elves, for instance, in the Norse tradition. They also talk about gnomes, like the Tomte. Tomte is a character that is like a little gnome that works on all farms, and there's specific ways of treating him in order to create benefit with him. Otherwise, he can kill your cattle, your sheep, your chickens, other things. Otherwise, he can actually help to provide more milk or more fur, like more wool, different types of things like this for your crops if he's appeased. So giving, little offerings to the Tomta of usually porridge is what you give with a little bit of honey, maybe a berry or something every once in a while. And that's actually a tradition that I have myself, that I keep myself, as it was, part of the Norse Hibernic tradition that was passed on to me. And so being able to just appease the spirits of the land by making little offerings and things like that's a type of folk magic for sure. Ceremonial magic, for instance, would be things that really cropped up as part of the 19th century occult revival. And these were things like the rituals performed by Freemasons, Rosicrucians. The Golden Dawn system is a ceremonial form of magic. Any of the rituals within the Ordo Templi Orientis, or the OTO, are all ceremonial magic based. And there's multiple forms. Primarily, though, they're of a hermetic and or a thelemic orientation. Thelema was more or less founded by Aleister Crowley. And the whole basis of that is do what thou will shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will. And Hermetic magic is realistically as above, so below, with the concept that there are three main arts that are uniquely human and need to be focused on, those being Kabbalah, or sometimes just referred to as magic, astronomy or astrology, and alchemy. Those would be the three main veins of Hermetic practice. And so Hermetic ritual usually has things to do with things that have been considered part of the Hermetic and alchemical traditions and magical traditions of the Renaissance. And they started to become practiced and put into kind of like ceremony form, where there's elaborate rituals and things that need to be said and intonations made in just these very particular ways and all these things in order to achieve the desired result. So there's that. And then, talismanic magic, both of the Renaissance and of foreign cultures. I mean, there's many different types of magic.
And you mentioned something about poetry that you recite that has, it's a certain effect on people. What was that?
Yeah, so within the Druid tradition of pretty much all of mainland Europe, but particularly of the British Isles, and I'm a student particularly of the Irish vein of this, that the Druids and bards were said to be able to possess such skill in the ways that they would speak and use language that they could literally manifest things and even create delusions of other people that they were talking to simply through song, poetry, speech, etc. And so that's something that I've specifically developed an interest in and have been studying very fervently for many, many years. I started when I was 8 years old. Even, when I was still Christian, doing Christian scholar work, I was always studying Druidry side by side. So I think that that's a really relevant and very important thing, because if people aren't able to visualize what it is that you're talking about when you're talking about it, or be moved emotionally, then you're not really taking advantage of the entire emotional, the thought and emotion based aspects of the brain, which are the power centers of most people. If people could change their thoughts and change their emotions or their feelings about things, then it actually does change the reality. That in itself is a very form of practical magic, a very practical form of magic rather. And so that's something that I like to work on, is being able to utilize words, stories, legends, poetry, song, etc., in order to be able to influence reality in such a way that it gets people put on the same page and back into a more harmonious state with the earth.
Well, that's cool. Now, you mentioned earlier, magical organizations like the OTO. Um, how much do you think secret societies really influence our modern world? When you look at our modern power system, everybody says the Illuminati, Freemasons rule the world. I don't know. What do you think? How much power do you think these secret societies really hold? I'm not thinking too much. What do you think?
Well, that's a really good question. Here's my experience, okay, is that most of these societies are filled full of nerds with capes. I was one of them, okay? So I'm a nerd with a cape, that's fine. They, in no way, shape, or form, have the capacity to, in most cases, to even shape or govern the destiny of their own lives or situations. They're mostly there for mental masturbation, to be perfectly honest, and to be like, oh yeah, I know these things, blah, blah, blah. And the amount of people to put things into practice are very, very small. That being said, it's undeniable that there are certain shadow orders. And I've told this to people all the time when I talk about secret societies and magic used for more nefarious purposes and stuff. It's like the people that are actually the most prevalent, I would say, within the magical communities are people who recklessly, out of power and lust for other things, are using more nefarious forms of magic and summoning entities that are doing things for them. It's like a form of a shortcut, but it actually yields some result. And I think that there are shadow organizations within many of the lodges and temples and other things like that, where they get together and they also have another side of performing, chaos magic or darker magic. Some people call it satanic magic. That literally within the scope of secret societies and fraternal fraternal organizations, Satan is really just Saturn. It's the lower components of Saturn, and so it deals with like density and moving slowly and predation and things like that. It's not at all what most people consider to be Satan. And Luciferian magic is something altogether totally different, and Enochian magic something totally different. But all of these essentially utilize magical ritual in order to be able to summon entities. And the entities that they're summoning, first of all, I don't think that they really even have a clue of what the hell they're doing, but it is wreaking havoc on people. And it is producing a result. And so I think that's also where people who fear magic or think that it's evil end up getting that perspective or that perception, is because of many people that are practicing, same with secret societies, these certain shadow orders within orders, as it's been referred to before. um, they do practice some nefarious things, like before on Crow 777, one of the paid episodes, we talked about adrenochrome rituals and abuse rituals and things like that. Like that's a thing, that is a practice that people perform. And so uh, it's hard to say. Do the secret societies govern the world? No. Do societies within societies govern the world? Yeah. So is it likely that you're going to have a baker, a candlestick maker, and police members and other people within a certain organization like Freemasons? Absolutely. How much are they as a group within the Freemasons trying to control anything outside of their own world? Very, very small. But then there's orders within that, groups of friends. The mayor might be part of that. Certain police might be part of that. Certain business owners might be part of that. And they just have a certain philosophy and way of doing things. Some of them for very good purposes and intentions for the community, and some of them with maybe more negative, or, and even by negative, I just mean to say domineering and controlling purposes. But I'll tell you what, it's not your local Freemason lodges, not your local Rosicrucian orders, or Golden Dawn temples, or any of these other things that are really directing shit inside of your community or even in the world at large. It would have to be like people who are also part of these organizations, who have formed clubs, who are part of, say, like the Worshipful Company of International Bankers in London, and people who have the capacity to be able to make those moves. And it's not nearly, from my perspective, it's not nearly as orchestrated as many people like to theorize or conspiracize about. Although it would be convenient if that was true, because it'd be easier to take them down. But that's sadly not the way that it works. Human ignorance is the cause of most of the reckless bullshit that's happening on our planet right now, not any one organization, or even several organizations that you can point a finger at and say, they're the ones doing it. They're creating the whole plan, the agenda. There's a lot of players on the board.
Right. Now, you mentioned adrenochrome earlier, and this is something that I've had plenty of discussions with people with, and I'm just wondering how, I guess, how prevalent this adrenochrome use is, especially in Hollywood, like you hear it is, and amongst elite factions and politicians. Is this really a desired drug for these elites?